Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. The current session is about gender as a social correlate. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the significance of gender as a variable or as a correlate in sociolinguistic studies. Well, if we go for the historical background or context of the idea of gender and how it has been explored through the times and is related to sociolinguistic studies, we can say that last 20 years or 30 years, I would say 2 to 3 decades is the time when, there has been a lot of exploration and a lot of work in sociolinguistics with particular reference to gender, and sociolinguists and linguists have tried to explore the kind of relationship between gender and language in the social context. So it is more like, exploring the triangle of gender, language, and sociolinguistics, and looking at the interrelationships of the three. Now there is so much interest in this field that if we look at all the activity, the intellectual activity and the research activity that is going on, in the light of that, it actually becomes hard to believe that, say, 30 or so years back, there was no interest or there was no significance attached to gender when it came to sociolinguistic research. So, when it comes to the gender as a variable, it's very important for us to think about that, initially when sociolinguistics emerged as a discipline, mostly, when the term man or men was used, or when the term people was used, all of these were taken as synonyms, and it was considered that they are equivalents to each other and there is no differentiation, and actually generically they stand for all, including, women in that. This general approach that was taken at the outset was more a male-oriented approach, and it was taking male as a norm approach. He does this, he speaks like this, his language is that, etc. And this he or this male-oriented approach thus automatically kind of led towards a focus on the male part of the societies, and thus thinking of that whatsoever men speak or howsoever men use language, that is what applies to women as well. But, as per se, this is not the case, how later on the times proved. In this sense, when we look at the initial sociolinguistic research, what we notice is that A, it was male-oriented, and B, women were more, kind of invisible in all those studies and in all that research that was conducted. However, the situation started changing in 1970s with the publication of an article that later on emerged on the intellectual scene as a book, Language and Women's Place. Language and Women's Place, 1975, that was written by Robin Lakoff. She was a female sociolinguist who, was based in, the University of California, Berkeley. And this particular work explored the use of language by women in their workplaces. This, for the first time, provided, certain kind of insights into how women, they differ, as users of language in the social context, how they differ from men. She drew attention to a wide range of gender differences in the language use, and thus argued that these differences were directly related to the relative social power system and the power structures that are created in the society through the gender roles. So, the basic idea that she worked on was that gender, a particular gender, has a particular kind of assumption of power, or the idea of power associated with it. And that idea of power affects the kind of language that that particular gender uses. Lakoff's work now seems to be dated. After that there has been a lot of research. This work worked as a stimulus to further explore, gender as a social correlate in the field of sociolinguistics. New theories were introduced, new perspectives were explored. So by so that today we may say that Lakoff's work is outdated now. But the work was significant in the sense that it set a new direction in sociolinguistics by taking, gender as a significant social correlate. So in that sense, the book still is a landmark and it is important. With the emergence of this particular research work and some other works that later on emerged on the sociolinguistic scene, the whole idea of or the concept of how language is used by users in terms of gender was changed. The idea had a major shift that language choices in sociolinguistics are determined by gender. Here, my dear students, I would also like to help you differentiate between the two basic terms, sex and gender. Well, sex is the physical shape and form of the body with which we as human beings are born as males or females. Whereas gender is a completely different idea. Gender is not a biological idea. Sex is a biological idea that deals with our biology, our body structure that nature gives to us as males or females. Whereas gender is a completely different idea. It is based on the social perspectives. Gender is the way we perceive our sex. The way we as society, the way as groups of people, the way, as human beings, we perceive these ideas of being male and of being female. Because in the society, we think as groups of people that, and as nations and as, different ethnicities, etc., that males behave differently, females behave differently, males are supposed to act differently, females are supposed to act differently. So, these differences in behavior, they are gender-based. That is how society perceives this differentiation of male and female. And then comes the linguistic behavior of genders, which means how linguistically different genders behave differently, how linguistically men are different from women, in terms of making their language choices, in terms of, using certain choices more frequently or less frequently, etc. So sociolinguists now, distinguish between sex and gender very clearly. And, though in terms of biological sex of being a male or a female, we are given the same abilities by nature to speak. Our speaking, organs work in the same way, and we can produce sounds and combinations of sounds in the same way. But, the social factors of gender, they affect our ways of speaking. And, this particular approach had a lot of contribution by Peter Fragile. His work was on his native city in Norwich, which showed whatever their social class, men in this area tended to choose pronunciations which were closer to the local vernacular and less close to standard English. So, gender here played the role as a social correlate. He further argued on the basis of these findings that non-standard speech must have covert prestige in competition with the overt prestige of, standard English. So, there are so many other factors in relation to, language use that play their roles, social pressures, prestige and power, and the ideas of this prestige and power attached to society as well as to gender, they affect the choices that are made. Sociolinguists in the 1980s turned their attention to broader aspects of talk, and what they explored were the conversational strategies characteristic of male and female speakers. It was found in 80s that when it comes to choosing conversational strategies, how would you speak, whether you would make questions more, or you would answer more, whether you would take pauses, or whether you would take the floor for a longer time when you are into a conversation, or you would take lesser time, etc. These strategies were discovered. Following are some of the strategies that were investigated. Minimal responses. For example, responses like yeah or This is like kind of more like reiteration of when one person is speaking, the other person keeps on saying yeah, okay. This is more like reaffirming what the other person is saying. And it was found that in terms of gender, there are differences and disparities in the use of these reinforcement channels. Hedges. I mean, maybe. It was found through sociolinguistic research that women, female gender, they tend to use these hedges more. What is the purpose of hedges? They soften. They make the impression or expression soft. So, for example, if you ask me about my colleague whose office is next to my office in my building, and for example, if you just knock at my door and you ask me where is, for example, her name is Azra. So if you ask me, where is Dr. Azra? And I say, she is in her room. Now you go there and you don't find her there, you would come back to me, or you at least would in your head think of it that I did not, tell you the right thing or the truth. But for example, when you ask me, where is Dr. Azra? And I say, maybe she's in her room, or probably she's in her room. By choosing these options, maybe or probably, actually what I am doing is, I am safeguarding myself. A hedge is a fence. What we call a bard, जिसको हम उर्दू में what we call bard. So, this is a boundary that defends us. So we hedge ourselves, we defend ourselves by using it as a hedge so that we are not blamed for that. And it is examined or explored that women use these more as compared to men. When it comes to tag questions, for example, this is really brilliant, isn't it? He is very intelligent, isn't he? So these choices, isn't it, isn't he, etc. These are the tag questions, which again are used for kind of reaffirming and making it a politer way of expression. And again, sociolinguistics research shows that in terms of gender, women use these more. Commands, directives, swearing. In all these cases, there are differences in the frequencies of use and the choices when it comes to males and females. Taboo language, compliments, turn-taking patterns, etc. They all vary from men to women when, there is a shift of gender. Then there are certain stereotypical, ideas that are attached to women that I would like to use here as an example. For example, generally, it is thought that women are chatterboxes, that women speak a lot, they speak more than men. However, it is very interesting that when this aspect of gender as a social correlate was explored, sociolinguistic research actually challenged this idea, and it was found that men speak more than women in certain contexts, in different contexts. So, it was not the gender, it was the situation that would determine that. There were different approaches that were used throughout the history of sociolinguistics to explore the language and gender relationship in the context of society. I would just name a few approaches so that if you are interested, you can explore them for yourselves. Deficit approach, dominance approach, difference approach, social constructionist approach, etc. However, when we, this was a whole series of going through one to the other kind of perspectives. However, if we look at the recent developments, today gender is conceptualized as something that is done, which means we perform our gender. How do we perform our gender? Through our language choices. So, it is never static, it is fluid, which means it keeps on changing. How much we perform our gender would vary from situation to situation, from context to context, and it is produced actively. What does it mean? It means as men and women, we try to create our gendered identities actively. When we speak, we are conscious of being a male or being a female, and how a male is perceived in a society and how a female is perceived in a society in terms of gender and language choices.